Listen, I don't know what it is that you might be going through right now, but right now in your current situation, what God wants you to understand is, in this time period that you're approaching, God is going to make you key in on your healing. I'm going to repeat that for somebody again. In this time period that you're approaching, God is going to make you key in on your healing. Why? Because God says he wants to resolve things. See, we as people look for clarity, look for resolutions in ways that sometimes put us out of God's alignment. And what God wants you to understand is, he does not want you to lean on your own understanding. Instead, he wants you to lean on to his, because with God, he will provide you with the reason. He will provide you with the victory. He will provide you with the understanding. And most importantly, he is in control of everything. Everything that you're feeling in that moment, everything that you need him for. When you invite God in, he addresses everything that is causing you harm, but you must allow yourself to be able to forgive. Forgive those people. Forgive them, because God says in the word, forgive them because they know not what they do. You know what I'm saying? So you have to understand, there's going to come a time in life where people, places, things, situations, maybe even you, where you're going to find yourself in a time period where you don't know how to seek God, where you don't know how to hear God. But God wants you to know that you have to be strong, because God wants somebody to understand is, in this season, he's going to call you to a form of isolation. In this isolation, God is going to force you to remember things of your past that are painful. Painful things that we as people try to suppress. The things that are making you drinking. The things that are making you have that sexual immortality. The things that are causing you to cut yourself. I don't know who it is that is self-harming, but God said he's forming an end to self-harming in addictions, in your ways of coping, in your ways of viewing yourself. God is putting an end to all the ways that you have been allowing yourself to feel low. Because guess what? God needs you to know your power. God needs you to know who you are. God needs you to know that you've elevated, you're changing into something greater. And the reason why God wants you to believe those things, because God says sweet words are like a honeycomb, sweet to the soul, healthy to the bones. When you speak life into yourself, you put yourself in a situation where God can free you. When you speak life into yourself, you put yourself in a situation in which God has more control over you. And when you have life, and when you have God having more control over you, God can deliver you from people, places, and things that are not doing the same thing as you. He will form an end to that suffering. He will form an end to that pain. He will start to make it more comfortable for you to look in that mirror. Look at me. Regardless of how you feel about yourself right now, God wants you to understand that you're beautiful. Regardless of whether you're a young man, regardless of whether you're a young woman, God wants you to understand that you have beauty inside of you that you have not yet discovered. The enemy wouldn't be attacking you with insecurities, with self-esteem issues, with how you think. The enemy wouldn't be attacking you so hard in the area in which he's inferior to you at. And see, what you didn't understand, the enemy is only attacking you so hard in this area right now that you know you're dealing with, that God is getting ready to deliver you from. He's only attacking that area because he wants to discourage your faith. He wants you to get into your own way. What does getting into your own way mean? He wants you to lean on your own understanding. That's what the enemy wants, because the enemy knows that when your mind is clouded, and when you don't know how to see or view yourself correctly, it puts you in a situation where you're able to pick up false obligations. What are false obligations? Things, idea, traits that are of the enemy, that is tied and that conforms you to the lies in which the enemy wants you to believe. And see, what we as people have to understand, there's going to come a time where God is going to allow these things to happen, because God needs you to know that trials build patience, trials build endurance, trials build a testimony that God will resurrect when you allow him to come in. Because God says it is good that I've been afflicted so that you can learn your statutes. What that means is, I'm saying it in a way to what you can understand. What God really saying is, God is going to allow you to go through situations, to go through things that makes you understand this world and how it's having an effect on you. Because the only way to be able to solve a problem is how to be able to recognize there is a problem, and how to be able to bring out a certain strength, bring out a certain knowledge. God has to put you in a situation where there has to be an experience, because an experience is what holds that testimony and what validates that God is real once you allow him to structure you. Because God has a way of pulling things out of us that we can't see. And he uses chaos. He uses the affliction to make you stronger. Because God has to first make you realize that you have strength. Strength, which he allows you to understand that you can endure. When you have strength and endurance, that means you can persevere until the end. Persevering, meaning you will always remain focused. You will always remain strong despite all odds, despite the amount of pressure, despite amount of adversity. God has to allow you to go through this a form of affliction so that you can realize that you have strength, so that you can realize you have the fruit of your Father which is in heaven. Because God said all good things work out for those who love the Lord, that are called according to his purpose. So what you have to understand is God is the only man that can make your path straight. God says in his word, there's no just man that walketh earth that sin not. He also says in the book of Isaiah, chapter 59, verse 1, he said, behold, the Lord's hand is not short that he cannot save, neither is his ear heavy that he cannot hear you. When God says, behold, the Lord's hand is not shortened, that means that no matter what you're faced with in life, no matter what you're feeling, no matter what is going on, there is nothing that God can't handle. Do you hear me? Look at me. There is nothing that the enemy is throwing your way that God can't fix. There is nothing that the enemy has had you in a form of bondage that God can't free you from. When God gives you that freedom, guess what? You're going to remember those things. You're going to remember that pain. You're going to remember, because God is going to turn that pain into strength. God is going to turn that struggle into a testimony that will stand the test of time, that will give you the blueprint of how to continuously win. Because sometimes in life, the biggest things that we need is the lesson. We as people know lessons as a loss. In order for you to learn how to win, you first know. In order for you to learn how to win, you first must learn how to weather the storm of enduring. AKA, you have to learn how to handle adversity by being present in the adversity, so that you can learn what to do and what not to do, which will cause you, depending on what you learn, to win. Success is not defined by materialistic things. Success is defined about, are you in the same situation that you was last year? Has your life improved? We as people get caught up into making what we call motion pictures, meaning you're moving in place. You may have motion, but God is a God who wants you to make progress. See, progress is not stationary. See, motion is when you're stuck in place and you burn it in a cycle where you're repeating. It may be looking as if your life is going up. It may be looking as if things are getting better, but it's a smoke screen. God doesn't want you to live no more in that smoke screen. God wants you to make progress. God doesn't want you to get caught up in your image of how you appear in a false world. AKA, God doesn't want you to no longer live in that facade. What does a facade mean? God does not want you to be comfortable living in the enemy's lies anymore. God wants to show you who you truly are. God wants to show you who he really created you to be. God wants to show you the plans that he has for you, plans to prosper you, not harm, but to give you hope in the future. God wants somebody to understand he does not want you to be comfortable in settling in that low place, because settling in that low place keeps you in a standstill to fulfill yourself with materialistic things, aka things that build that facade, things that create that motion. But motion and progress are two different things, young lady. Motion and progress is two different things, young man. You have to be able to know, with progress, there are going to come trials, there are going to tribulations. Progress is the trials and tribulations that builds your faith, that restructures your endurance, that restructures your mind, and that builds spiritual wealth. Because spiritual wealth is way more important than what you have physically. Because as a man thinketh, so is he. If you're rich in spirit, there are going to be things that you acquire with God that only his hands can say, that only his grace can say that you've gained it by. Because things of this world, when you pick up these false obligations, when you're chasing after money, you're running into an early grave. Because the love of money is the root of all evil. Because God says do not store your treasures on earth, but instead store your treasures up in heaven. So what he's telling you is wisdom is more precious than rubies. And when God says wisdom is more precious than rubies, it means there's nothing that can compare to her. Why? Because when you have wisdom, that means you have the spiritual knowledge. You have the spiritual protection of God. You have the spiritual knowledge that God needs. That favor grants you a certain amount of freedom. That when you walk with God, that wisdom will allow you to move wiser than a serpent. That wisdom is your protection. That wisdom is your strength. That wisdom is your strong faith. That wisdom is your enormous trust in God. And those are the things that will allow you to inherit the world that God created you. Because God said the meek shall inherit the earth. You have to understand. Ask yourself, when I as a person have these things, whether it's money or wherever I get something that I really desire and want it. You know, after you get something you really want it so bad, when it comes to something that's materialistic, like a pair of shoes or that new car or some new clothes, you know, you never really truly are satisfied, right? You find something else that you feel like you need to satisfy what you feel that you should look or that you think that will equate to happiness. But notice this. When a man chases after the things of this world, there's going to be a hunger for more and more and more, which will later become greed if you're not careful. And see what God wants us to repeat these cycles. He wants us to repeat these things. He wants us to go through these things that we know as affliction so that we can see how the things of this world are pointless without him. Because the difference between living life without God is there's a struggle without God and there's a struggle with God. The struggle without God is pain, chaos, and misery. The struggle with God is you're learning how to be comfortable in your skin. Learning how to let go of things of the past. Learning how to welcome in that peace. Welcome in true love. Welcome in a renewed faith. Conforming to the renewal of your mind. That struggle is not a struggle when you walk with God. That is what God calls strength. That's why God loves allowing his children to be in a time period in which they're going through, aka what we know as the struggle. But really the struggle is to show you that you have the strength to survive despite any odds that you're under. And if you're a person who has been making do with life, who's been living, who's been surviving with the bare minimum resources compared to others, well, God wants you to understand you're stronger than you give yourself credit. He needs you to understand that there's going to come a time in life where you have to get out of your own way and allow God to see you for you. And when I'm saying allow God to see you for you, because God wants you to see yourself as him. He wants you to see yourself as his greatest creation. He wants you to see yourself as not being a mistake. Because if you are a person who haven't realized it yet, despite what you're going through, despite what you're suffering from, you're still alive. You're still well. Those struggles, those addictions, those adversities, those problems that you have, noticed it hasn't killed you. It may be depleting you, but it hasn't killed you. And what God wants to stop the depleting of your spirit. He wants to stop that pain. He wants to put an end to that pride, shame, guilt. Because pride, shame, and guilt are the things that you pick up with the enemy when you pick up his false obligation, meaning you chase after money, you chase after material, you chase after status rather than chasing the fulfillment of that void, because the enemy wants you to pick up the things of this world to try to replace that void that you have. But all it does is create a bigger void, because once you acquire the things that you feel as if you need it, God shows you that you don't need that. You need more. You find yourself needing more. And see, God wants that hunger, that thirst, that unsatisfaction. God allows that unsatisfaction. He allows that need for more, that need for greater to happen. He allows it to build up till you reach your breaking point. And at your breaking point is when you are going to call out to God. That's why he allows us to be filled. And in these time periods where we as people go through so much, and we have mental breaks, and we have time when we lose hope, we have time when we're crying and we're thinking about killing ourselves, or we thinking about giving up on life, or however it is that we feel in that breaking moment, the enemy wants you to think that your life is over, that God forgot about you, and that you should cry in your sorrow and lie in your sorrow. But at that point, what God wants you to understand, when you get back into this situation in which you're going to be at a breaking point, because God allows things to build up a sense of intolerance, which means he's going to allow you to encounter things because the signs are in front of you to pick up. You hear me? The signs are there for you to notice that things are needing to change. Things are needed to be done differently. And when you can't see it, God allows these things to build up, and then it's like you explode, because you lose all control. And that is designed for it, because when you have control over yourself and you're leaning on your own understanding, it gives the enemy full access and control to manipulate you. And that's why when you don't have that relationship with God, that's why when you don't know how to give everything over to God, he's going to protect you, but he's going to allow you to learn through the affliction, because he knows that eventually you're going to call out to him. And God will always place people, places, and things in your presence. But it's all about, are you paying attention to the signs until it gets to that point? It's somebody on this video right now that's going to get to this point again, that's going to contemplate whether or not to commit suicide. Whoever you are, you struggle from deep depression and anxiety, and you're trying to give God the chance, but every time your life get good, you get hit with a blow that tends to make you setback, whether in the form of addiction, or whether you feel this dark glow over you. You feel dark, you feel gloomy, you start to cry yourself, you start to worry, which it triggers your anxiety, it makes you go all over the place. What God wants you to know in specific is, when this happens to you, he wants you to go and find a happy place. Go and find a place where you can talk to him, where you feel comfortable. Go based upon your spirit. When you feel yourself get hyperventilate, when you feel yourself panicking, he wants you to take breaths. He wants you to breathe. He wants you to breathe, and he wants you to go to a place where you find comfort. And when you go to that place that you find comfort in, he wants you to tell him everything that you're feeling about yourself. Everything. Because he needs you to speak out of your mouth the pain that you're feeling, so that he can correct it. He's going to allow this situation to happen again, because he wants you to be given a second chance of doing something differently. Every time, whether you know it or not, God has been the person that's been talking you off that ledge. And he wants you to know that you must allow yourself to do something different, because you always end up getting it together when it seems like you lost all hope, when it seems like your life is worth ending. You always think about, what if I do this and I have regret? This is specific confirmation for someone. And what I want this person in particular to know is, the only reason why you're still alive today, because you have a mission that God wants you to complete. God is going to use you. I don't know what for in particular, but God is going to use you. And when whether it's one person, whether it's multiple people, when you hear this, it's going to be confirmation for you.